Okay, so Baron has that incredible memory. He remembers things since Noah, and what gets me to talk on stuff that I've long ago forgotten. My memory goes back 2 sleeps, and then it's just vacant, because there's not much sleep. But anyway, he's asked me to talk on a bigger picture stuff as well as what we covered off on this morning. And if you can remember what we spoke about this morning, those were very much tools for part of a bigger vision. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some macro stuff here, which I think will help put your assignment and your ministry and your why, your reason for doing KBA and ISOM and so on courses into a perspective of a great big macro vision that God has for the earth and for mankind on earth. And that needs to be narrowed down and specific, this vision of God's, as opposed to some generic, okay, the kingdom of God must come into the earth. That's a very generic thing. It's all open to interpretation and so on. Okay? So what does it look like? And then where do we all fit in? And then how do we bring the culture of the kingdom of God into the earth in a physical sense? We're pretty good at bringing the spiritual side and getting salvations and so on, but we are very much underperforming. 2.4 thousand million Christians on earth. We don't have a big enough impact on the planet, on the culture of the planet. We don't know how to occupy culture very well. Okay, we occupy through oppression and adversity. That's our natural way of doing it, and it doesn't work. It never has worked, it never will work. Okay, so I'm going to talk about big picture stuff and then narrow it down. Now, in order to do that, I have to go back to about 1987 and show you how this came about from my perspective and what the Lord showed me and how we then introduced it and deployed it as national visions for countries around the world. Okay? So I came from Africa, a country called Rhodesia. I grew up there. I grew up a bit of time in Zambia and then in what was called Rhodesia. It's now called Zimbabwe. Now, Rhodesia was the breadbasket of Africa. It was the most successful economy on the continent. It did not have apartheid. I grew up as a white-black kid. I had no European friends. They were all black. My first language in Zambia was Chibemba. And then when I moved to Rhodesia, it was Shona. English was my second language. So I was fully integrated, and that was, you could intermarry. It wasn't like South Africa where the races were segregated. When I was sent to boarding school, I'm telling you this is background because it's important. I was 4 years old. I was put on a train from, in those days in Zambia, across 4 countries. I was 4 years old, unescorted. Okay, to go to school in South Africa, which was an strict apartheid country. And as a white-black kid, I couldn't speak good English. I couldn't speak Afrikaans at all, which were the European languages. And so, the African language was Xhosa, and I couldn't speak that either. But I went to go and find the black kids, and they ran away because I was white. And the white kids beat me up because I wanted to talk to the black kids. So it was a mess for a 4-year-old, you know. But the point is, Rhodesia had none of that. We could all intermarry, we could all go to the same schools. They did have schools that were entirely for black kids that white kids couldn't go to purely because of language barrier. They wanted to educate everybody. It was easier to teach in the different languages. So, but there was no apartheid, is my point. So we had this model state. It wasn't perfect, no country ever is, but we had this model country in southern Africa, which was the breadbasket of Africa. We were then attacked by all the neighbouring countries because the government wouldn't hand over to black majority rule, and the reason they wouldn't is because they deemed that the indigenous people were still very tribalised, and they wouldn't. There would be a bloodbath if that was the case. So they said, look, we've got to bring in human rights and all that sort of stuff, and then they have the one man, one vote, hand over the country. They just said it was too early. You know, I was just a young kid growing up, so it wasn't involved in the politics. But we had to fight that war. So we fought the war. The war went on for 14 years. That's 3 times as long as World War II. I fought that war for 10 years. Every single day, we're being invaded. It wasn't like, you know, the US fights wars all around the world. We were fighting at home and being invaded and so on. Anyway, the war came to an end in 1980, and Robert Mugabe took over and proceeded to plunder the country. Okay, it was a socialist government bordering on communism. Everyone was comrade Mugabe and comrade this and comrade that. Trained by the Russians, trained by the Red Chinese actually, and ultimately they formed a socialist government and then began to plunder the country. And within a few short years, the country went from the bread basket of Africa to the basket case of Africa. The people were starving, and Robert Mugabe became one of the top 10 richest men in the world, and the people starved to death and so on. And it's today one of the poorest countries in the world still, after all these years. So that is a background of what was in my head when I left that country, and eventually, I won't bore you with the story of that. I was accused of blowing up a bunch of British planes and stuff, which I didn't do. But ultimately, I ended up stateless in Singapore. I couldn't go back to Zimbabwe because they were waiting at the airport to have a chat. So I managed to get my family out and then lived in Singapore for 4 years and got into Australia. When I got to Australia, I thought, wow, we're in heaven now. This place, there's no corruption, because what happened in Zimbabwe was sheer greed. Greed and self-centeredness. Corruption is a function of that. The culture of greed and self-centeredness plundered that nation and centralized the wealth at the expense of everybody else. Okay, that's what physically happened. So I came to Australia and looked around and thought, damn it, this is awesome. This is heaven where we've come to. There's no war, no one's trying to shoot me, and we can bring up my kids nicely here, and so on. But you know what? Within 6 weeks, I started to see the corruption. I got ripped off. I bought a motorcycle business. Virtually every bike that was traded in was encumbered. The Aussies were as crooked as the rest of us in Africa. The government was crooked. The Queensland police force was running brothels and drug rackets. It was all exposed. There was so much going on. And I took another look at this country and thought, wow, doesn't matter where the country is, if it's Africa, if it's Australia or wherever, doesn't matter if it's a government as black or white or communist or capitalist, doesn't matter if it's Zionist, doesn't matter what it is. And I thought, what is the problem with people? Why is it? And you have to actually go through a 10-year war and see we won just about every single battle in that war, but we lost the country at the first election, okay? And then it went south so quickly. And as a secular person, non-Christian, I watched all of this when I got to Australia, and I thought, how are we going to stop this country, the breadbasket of Southeast Asia or the southern Pacific region, becoming like Zimbabwe? If we don't stop, the rot is going to happen, because we've just seen it happen in a very powerful economy in Africa. So I sat back and just started looking at why this happens. And then I got saved, and Baron mentioned that this morning through Reinhard Bonnke. And as soon as I got saved, I've been going to church for about 2 years with my wife, but I never believed any of it. But when I got saved, I thought I better pay attention. And so I did, and I was listening to the pastor preaching on Sunday, and I spoke to my new Christian friends. I said, how does that work on Monday? This bloke Boaz, leaving all the profit in the field here for the people. How come, how are we going to do this? No, you don't do that, dude. That's what they teach. Maybe there's some moral story there, but it's not a practical thing. It's 2,000 years ago, or Boaz was like 3,000 years ago. It was an agricultural society. It's not going to work in business, So they never ever believed, my new friends, what they were being taught. They never knew how to apply it, and so they didn't apply it. And hence the corruption, and hence everybody creating wealth at the expense of everybody else, which means that it will ultimately become centralized, and the entrepreneurs will own it all. Okay, so all the corrupt people will own it all. And that was when I really sat down and looked at what is the Lord teaching us in terms of business. What is biblical economics and how do we apply it? So in other words, how do we study applied biblical economics? Applied biblical economics is very much different to biblical economics. Okay, you can look at the Bible, it's written a long time ago. and think about it and have the same mentality that my new Christian friends had and not apply it and just take the moral stories out of it. That's not good enough in the modern world. We will never bring the kingdom of God into the earth on a physical sense doing that. So therefore, I wanted to understand it. So I went right back in history, long before the internet, and studied. I'd learnt a lot at school, believe it or not, but I wanted to know more now with the context of the Bible. So I went right back and looked at all the different societies, the early clans, and then the city-states, and then the great empires that were now obsolete and gone and redundant and so on, and then the modern world forming into the current geopolitical countries and so on. And I looked at all of the cultures and all of the problems all the way through, and there was one common denominator which always dominated, which was always the problem, and it was the reason why nothing ever worked. Not Zionism, not capitalism. Capitalism, guys, I was talking to the KBA people yesterday, is 100% from the devil. If you're going into the marketplace and competing for someone else's business, maybe the young family sitting next to you in church last Sunday, and you take all their share, God's not happy about that idea. Okay? Doesn't work, never has, never will. But any other economic framework or political modeling has never worked throughout history. All of them have imploded. In the modern history of the last 800 years or so, it implodes around every 80 to 100 years. And if you look back, you'll see that. Take the United States, go back through the depressions, the recessions, the world wars, all the stuff, it's always the same. And it comes from the same root cause, greed and self-centeredness. That is what the devil has used to keep the kingdom of God out of the earth ever since Cain and Abel, since the first business transaction in history. Okay? And it caused the flood, it caused the destruction of the promised land. That was why it was done. It's why Joseph had to get the opulence out of Egypt and all the stuff he did. Okay, when you study all of that, you'll see that theme going all the way through the Bible, and you'll see the Lord trying over and over again to intervene and fix these things. And those things started off where they were like 1,800 years apart from from Adam to the flood, and then they started getting closer and closer together. And you'll find that the promised land is like 400 years after Abraham gets there, coming around in a circle and getting closer and closer together until these days you're finding the cycle is about every 10 to 15 years. There's a major catastrophic international event. And the Lord is doing this because it's quicker and quicker, especially with the technology of today, for the devil to do the opposite of what Coach Tam was talking about. Okay? Young kids can come up, radicalize and get on the net and radicalize a hell of a lot of other people, and all of a sudden they all want to kill each other. So this is the macro thing of what's going on. So I sat there in 1987 and thinking, so what can we possibly do about it? And I was trying to understand how Boaz, he was just the model at the time, but I studied all the other biblical figures and so on. And I thought, okay, it looks like these guys are all looking after all of the stakeholders in their businesses, not just the owners of the business. And when, of course, there was slavery and everything else, but the ones that were biblically successful were looking after all of the stakeholders. And the community is a stakeholder in your business. So when you're studying economics, I'm not an economist, by the way. I'm a world leader in applied biblical economics, but not economics. And I lecture at lots of unis all over the world, secular, and I contest the modern, economic modeling and so on, and always win because we have proof of concept, and there is no proof of successful concept from capitalism. Okay, so that's the one we contest the most. But postmodernism, all the others, not going to work either, unless they change the underlying culture. So I looked at my business when I was living. I'd just gotten into Australia, I'd just gotten saved, trying to figure it all out, and I had a motorcycle business. And it was a Ducati, well, we were selling all the Italian bikes, Ducati, Laverda, Cagiva, Moto Guzzi, and so on. And I had mechanics, I think about 4 or 5 mechanics in the workshop, sales team out the front, I was the owner. And I looked at this lot and I was paying everybody more than the award rate because they were specialists. And if they left me, I have to send mechanics to Italy to get trained and come back. So I just paid them more as good business sense to retain them. But I could hear them talking in the workshop. There was a glass window between my office and the workshop. I could hear them talking. And they hated me. They used some colourful language to whenever they spoke about me, and for no reason. I was a good boss, looked after them, paid them well, paid them more than everybody else, and so on. But they actually hated me, and I realised, the reason that they hated me was because they saw me as a refugee coming into their country, and now I was their boss, and I was known as a refo, so that's why they hated me. Just the tall poppy syndrome, basically. Anyway, I thought, okay, let's test this biblical stuff. So I called them into my office one by one, and these are big burly bikies, like motorcycle industry. Sit down, dude, let's have a chat, nicely. And say, so tell me your dreams. How do I work with your dreams? What do you want to be? Do you guys want more money? So one by one, do you want more money? Do you want to get into management? Would you prefer to be on the sales floor? Do you want shares in the company? How can I help? And one by one, I went through them. And to my absolute amazement, they all had the same dream, and it wasn't money. Their dream was to become the best and most famous motorcycle mechanic. I was first dealing with my mechanics before the sales team in the industry. And I looked at this and thought, man, that's fickle. If your occupation is your identity, or your vocation is your identity, how fickle. What happens if you lose your job, or, break your arm and you can't work or something? But anyway, I didn't say that. I just said, really, is that what you guys? So I called them all back into the office together. So this is my employees. There are 6 major stakeholders in your company. Okay, so it's obviously the shareholders, the owners, and profit-driven capitalism focuses only on them at the expense of all the others, milks the rest of them. Okay, so now the 6 stakeholders, the next one is your employees, and then obviously there's your customers, there's your supply chain, there's the community and the environment. People, profit, planet. This is long before Al Gore invented climate change. Okay, it's God's way. All right, he told us right in the beginning, steward this joint, you dudes. Okay, so people, profit, planet, treated equally. If any one of them is treated unequally, it's not going to work. So that was what I was trying to put into place. I called all of them back in the office, including the sales team. I said, guys, you all want the same thing. So here's what a suggestion is. We're going to import the fastest Ducati they've ever built in Italy. You guys are going to hot it up even further. You're going to make it lighter and faster. We're going to get an A-grade rider, take this thing up to Wanneroo, which was the racetrack in the city of Perth, and we're going to start beating the European bikes and the other Italian bikes on the racetrack. And that way, if you can win and you can beat them, then you're going to get famous and I'm going to make money, okay? And we'll all prosper together. And they said, what, would you do that? And I said, yeah, absolutely. If I don't work with your dreams, how on earth are we all going to prosper in this company? So we did that, and it was expensive. It's much harder to make a European bike go fast than it is a Japanese bike. But we did. And then we went up to the Wanneroo and we started on the Thunderbike series, okay? And we started to win the Thunderbike series. So I said to the guys, do you think you can take on the Japanese bike in Formula 500s and the Opens? Oh yeah, definitely. So we did. And we began to win. And we became the first in the world to beat the Japanese bikes. And we were in the magazines all over the world, and these guys were there getting their selfies, which we didn't have in those days, but you had to be developed. But either way, they became famous, and all of a sudden they loved me, and I was not a refo, now I'm an Aussie, and all sorts of things like that. And I looked at this and I thought, awesome, this works. This is biblical economics working. So what about the other stakeholders? Okay, let's work with pricing for the customers. Let's give a better service. Let's do this. Let's invite them to the workshop for lessons. All that kind of stuff. And I had to tell my mechanics, you stop smoking weed just so we can get our upmarket customers to come in and do these little things. So anyway, it was fascinating to watch. So I started working with all of them. And ultimately, we became multimillionaires very quickly. I think it was the second financial year, the turnover, I bought it with a $60,000 turnover. Second financial year, it was over $1 million because of the way we treated the employees and the stakeholders. So that was the business side of it taken care of from God's point of view. But then it occurred to me, what about, I'm a very competitive person. And so in business, I'm competitive, and one of my opposition on the day was also very competitive, and together we put everyone else out of business in the Italian field. So we were the last 2 left standing motorbike dealers, Ducati dealers in the city. And it was a case of, you know, who's going to be the last one standing? Well, it's me, now it's me, and off we went. Now, I didn't know him personally. I knew who he was, obviously, my opposition. And one day we went on what's called an adventure rally, where all the motorcycle fraternity goes down to this mountainous area, and we race on dirt bikes through the bush with somebody next to us, like an enduro race. And so we parked there in the bush, and there's cars parking all around, camping. And I got paired off with this guy, and we took off. There was no time. It was all time trials, just took off, and we raced all day and whatnot. And he was a lunatic. He's a New Zealander, and he was mad. And I'm also mad, so we just had a ball. And at the end of the day, our cars were next to each other. Our women, our girl, my wife, and they'd all made friends. They found they were all, my wife was a Christian. I was now a Christian, and his wife was a Christian. He wasn't. Anyway, they'd all, swapped notes and everything, and were best buddies by the time we got back. And I thought, this is a good dude, and I met all his little girls and his wife. Oh, it's an awesome family. And then we introduced himself. He was my opposition. So you can imagine what the Lord's laughing in heaven, saying, yes, you see. Now, we all liked each other, but now I still want to put him out of business. And he still wants to put me out of business. How does that work? Okay, what's going to be the result of that? Must I throw them into financial hardship by beating them and putting them out of business, taking all their market share? And we did studies on what happens. The biggest cause of domestic violence in Australia is financial hardship. The biggest cause of financial hardship is unemployment, pushing people out of the market for self-gain, maximising self-interest at the expense of others. The biggest cause of suicide in the nation is financial hardship. The biggest cause of so much stuff. And we did research and quantified all of that, and I'll come to that in a minute. But the point is, I realised the Lord showed me, contrary to all modern economic theory, there's a seventh stakeholder in my company, in my business. It's my opposition. And there should be no such thing as an opposition. They should be fraternity. We should work together. And I thought about it, and I went and spoke to him a few days later, and I said, dude, you know what? We should be fraternity, not opposition. We should not compete for market share. We should grow a bigger market. We should attract people into the industry. And as people being born, Australia's got a growing population. We should have a bigger market. The country can cope with that without destroying each other. And he didn't trust me. He said, I don't trust you Rhodesians. And he said, I'll keep an eye on you. We'll do it, but I'll be watching you. And I said to him, we could niche if we want to. He's really good engineering, got all the fancy equipment, not very good with the public. So I said, if you want, we'll send you all our engineering. We'll do all the retail stuff. We're good with the public. Anyway, so we did that. And look, we just became wealthy, and our employees became wealthy, and it was the model, economic model, that was so good. And I told him, this is actually biblical economics. Whether you're a Christian or not, it works, okay? So then, after that, when I saw that working, we actually made room for all the other ones that were out of business to come back into the industry, and the sector prospered. And as the sector prospered, I took a really good look, and I thought, wow, if we ever have to build this Matthew 25 sheep nation, these are the building blocks. We've learnt how. Because if you can do it to an industry or a sector, you can do it to the nation, and you will get universal prosperity and human flourishing, okay? Instead of the social distress and hardship that capitalism would create naturally. So fast forward then probably to 2011, which what's that, 25 years, and the Lord gave us as KI the vision of a modern day sheep nation in 2011. I told you about that this morning, and we launched that in 2013. The Lord said, you've got 2 years, it was on a pray day, to learn what it looks like. I think I told you this morning, I can't remember. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The 2 years to learn, identify, describe what does a modern day sheep nation look like in the physical sense on earth. Okay, not an allegorical Christianese, be nice to me when I'm in prison, I've got no shirt, give me a shirt. That all means something. Okay, so we interpreted all of that. I haven't got time to cover that because I want to go into some fascinating stuff that we're doing at the moment, which will bring the kingdom of God into the earth in a physical sense. So once we had identified it, we launched it in 2013. And of course, immediately there was a backlash by ASIC. ASIC is the same as your SEC, and they came after me. So we launched the national vision, and we launched it big time, right around the nation, and it was massive. We launched it in the Sunshine Coast, and then the Gold Coast at Pastor Suzette's chapter of KI, and then in Newcastle, and then in Perth, and we had another one somewhere. So we launched it all. By the time we got to Perth, there was so many new pastors in the audience all wanting to know, what's this thing about a modern-day sheep nation? They'd never been to KI before. And I looked at everybody, all these new faces, people with big beards, and who's these dudes? Put up your hands. Who's brethren? Zip, up they all went. Who's Catholics? All this new people had come to KI to see what's this national vision and wanted to know about it. I wasn't even out of the Virgin Lounge to get on the plane, and there was texts coming in and Word documents says, please read our church vision. Is this where Sheep Nation goes? Is this what it, all in highlight, they were in yellow, and so on. So they bought into this vision. And of course, ASIC came after me. If you can discredit my integrity, which is what they were trying to do, they weren't successful. This is 2014 by then. Then you can shut down this movement because it's all about integrity in business. And that's been going on and on and on. But anyway, fast forward a bit further, by about 2018, we had propagated it around the world in over, with over 100 KI chapters around the world, all teaching the same thing. And then we were ready to launch what we call the ASP movement, the All Shall Prosper movement. And that is a movement. We will never, ever create a sheep nation with Christians alone, okay? Not only because half the Christians are crooked, but because there's a whole secular world that has to come with us. It's sheep nations, ethnos. In this day and age, it's not necessary people groups, ethnic people groups, it's geopolitical boundaries. We're bringing it out from the New Testament into today's market, okay? Who and what are we today? Sheep nations. There are none, by definition, on earth, by the way. Not one. Not America. Not at all. All right? So then once we started to put the ASP movement together in about 2017, we built the KI website to start teaching people, just to make sure that everybody learnt the basics, and then we had a strategy to launch the movement. But then COVID came in 2020-ish, and so we had to back off from that. It was pointless trying to launch it during COVID. Now the ASP movement was to cast a vision for a nation, get government people, federal people to come in, get academia to come in, world leaders, academics to come in, to back up what we're teaching, and launch it as a vision for the nation, to change the culture that drives the marketplace, from greed and self-centeredness to caring and sharing. And we had so much proof of concept, and I'd lectured at so many universities, even UCLA, to the executive master's degree, and all of them, they took 2 hours to ask questions. The professor told me it's a 1 hour, 40-minute lecture, 20 minutes questions. The questions went for 2 hours. Okay, so point being, we know our topic, and we can prove our topic. There's no economist who can prove that capitalism works or any other ism works, all right, because it doesn't. So eventually we had to back off, and this is the enemy. I'm not saying that we caused COVID, but the enemy did not want the ASP movement to start up, okay? It was way too powerful, way too threatening, and the enemy has come against it with the most massive counterattack. That's fine. That's what I was trained for from 4 years onwards, okay? So I don't care about that. I expect that, and if I don't get it, then something's wrong. We're not doing it properly. But either way, in October 2023, we launched the ASP movement on the Gold Coast. We had the ASP Summit, and we had guys like Professor Bruno Roche, Dr. Bruno Roche. He was the chief economist for Mars Corporation, the biggest private company in the world, for 20 years. It was his mob that said to the board, when is enough profit enough? They'd plundered their supply chain in Kenya to the extent that those little guys picking all the cocoa and growing the cocoa were so sick and so feeble because they weren't getting paid enough that the supply chain broke down. Excellent outcome. Well done, Mars. So they sent Bruno to go and find out, and he came back and he said, you've plundered them into oblivion. You haven't looked after all your stakeholders. There's the minimum factor. You'll never get above that. When is enough profit enough? So they fixed all of that up, and then they formed the economics of mutuality, EOM, okay? It wasn't national, it was still company-centric, which is its weak point, which we've fixed since then. So I didn't know Bruno in those days. I met him at the European Economic Summit in in Amsterdam in 2014, and all the others, the world leaders in that sort of stuff. Anyway, that is now the core business modules at Oxford University. Okay, the Said Business Institute, that is applied biblical economics, and it's now advancing based on what KI is teaching a step further to take on that seventh stakeholder, and then it'll become a proper economic model. It's also being taught at Notre Dame, at Erasmus University in Rotterdam. There's a new centre being mooted for Sydney University, and it's spreading all over the world. Okay, so Mars Corporation came up with all sorts of ways of managing and monitoring the progress at the big corporate level. In the meantime, KI was building it up from the SME, small to medium enterprise level, but also lecturing throughout academia to get it into the heads of the people who started the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s, which is all the wokeism rubbish that we face today. Okay, that started in the universities in the early 60s with the Cultural Revolution. We are now countering that. You know what, guys? You can never mop up the water without switching off the tap. You know, we all got different assignments. Some of us is to deal with the symptoms, but the captains of industry better go and switch off the tap, because otherwise everyone else is going to drown. So we are now in academia all over the world turning off the tap of what started the Cultural Revolution with applied biblical economics. It's amazing to watch. Yeah, this is the Lord doing it. And this is what these guys are teaching, you know, in a basic format with the, you know, ousting Babylon and things like that. It's come a long way since then. Anyway, of course, this whole thing is about occupying culture. Just dealing with my drinking problem. Okay. So it's all about occupying culture. And if we can occupy the culture in the marketplace, then we will occupy the nation. Okay? The marketplace undergirds anything else, all other 6, 7, 8, or 12 mountains. There's all different mountains these days. They've had little baby hills. And now there's quite a few of them. Doesn't matter. Still the same economy, right? And we will never occupy through oppression, guys. I mentioned that earlier. Napoleon said the objective of war is victory, but the objective of victory is occupation, okay? We don't occupy well as Christians, and nor does anybody else. You just look at your government, it swings from one to the other, one side to the other every 8 years or so, and then all the good work gets undone depending on your perspective, and it all starts again. And generally speaking, they move closer and closer together until you get the Hegelian concept of parties merging in terms of public policy and so on, okay, because they're all going after votes so they can stay in power, etc., and they're not driven by national vision. And the Bible says, where there is no vision, my people will perish, and they do, okay? So the idea then is we must occupy through unity, and therefore we must win the hearts and minds of our adversaries. We must not just discard them and just crush them down and think that the human spirit won't rise up again, because it will. It always has, and it always will. So if we can win their hearts and minds, then we will occupy through unity. And the only opposition that you'll have are the extremists, and you can disenfranchise them by taking away their following, by providing solutions for their needs without compromising your values. Okay, that is the philosophy of the ASP movement. I learned that in 1987. It's the only way. My adversaries in the workshop, they love me. 40 years later, Dave, happy birthday, dude, when you're coming home. You know, back to Perth 40 years ago. Still, they email me and say hello, because I worked with their dreams and I won their hearts and minds. Now, we've done that at the highest level. I won the hearts and minds of the Greens. This morning I told you when the ABC was trashing me, the Greens were trashing me. We went down to Hobart, spoke to the leader of the Greens, and within an hour she was supporting our coal to hydrogen project. Okay, within 1 hour, the most radical, the Greens movement started there in Tasmania, okay, in the world, and then she joined the cause. Okay, so at the end of the day then, guys, there's massive backlash that came against us the minute we launched the ASP movement. Within a few weeks, ASIC came after me again, about 44 allegations, all technicalities and an ambiguous law, which we're busy fighting at the moment. If you Google me, you'll see all that. ASIC, then the ATO, the tax office, Australian Tax Office, came after me, auditing me back 23 years. Okay, unprecedented in Australian corporate history. That's what our lawyers told us. So ASIC, ATO, the ABC, I'm their favourite film star. They're always trashing me on TV programs. Anything be ASIC, ATO, it's just all the Antichrist having a shot at me. But so the point is that the ASP movement is growing fast all over the world, despite me having to stand back a bit and not be the public persona of it, because they're trying to discredit my business, integrity and honesty and so on. But the key, as I've said, is to provide solutions, okay, for our adversaries. And if we can do that, and if we focus on that, God will provide those solutions, because it's what he wants. And nothing can stop his will as long as we're doing his will, his way. God's will, God's way, as you know. So that I mentioned to you, the CSEC technology this morning. I've mentioned that to you simply because it is the solution to the toxic ideology of climate change. Okay, so whether you accept climate change or not, it doesn't matter. The fact is, we should all be conservationists. We should all look after the planet anyway. And if there's a new way of making money, well, fine, build your stupid windmills and so on. But the point is that would never supply reliable energy security for a nation. So either way, we let that bubble away. But underneath it all is a toxic ideology to destabilize Western economies, to stop our young people from having children, their mindset at university. I lecture at unis, I talk to them all, often lecturing for our youth group and young adults, and other churches, and I find the same thing. We're going to bring our kids into a scorched earth, there's no point in having kids. They've kind of lost their hope, okay? And God's whole balance sheet is children and children's children, and through greed and self-centeredness in the marketplace, and the greed and self-centeredness of the climate change radicals, not just the concerned people who want the place cleaned up, I'm talking about the radicals, they are destroying what God's vision is for humanity, okay? So, CSEC, the Lord gave us that. I told you about it this morning while the ABC was trashing me on TV. This guy phones, and that we turned into the CSEC technology. And that is the only global decarbonisation technology in the world that can decarbonise energy production and any other emissions profitably. Okay, and that is now reaching its optimization stage in its at the prototype, and that'll be launched soon. Now, the biggest emitters in the world have approached us. The single biggest emitter on Earth is a power station, is a petrochemical plant called Sasol in South Africa at Secunda. They emit 66 million tonnes per annum. They are the biggest. They emit more than the whole of Portugal. And they have said that this CSEC, if it works, because we're still optimizing it, it is the silver bullet of climate change, and they want a license. And that license is over $100 million, which is nothing to them compared to what they have to pay. Okay, so lots and lots of those are approaching us for the license. So I'm not talking about it from a money perspective. Yes, we need lots of money. If we're going to leverage corruption in Africa, we better leverage energy. And that, I can sit with African leaders, I'm fluent to a large extent, and know the cultures, and I can sit with them as a peer. That's why we built the multi-billion-dollar company. It's a tool to achieve the Sheep Nation vision, okay? So that's just one issue. The other big initiatives that we've developed over the years is eradicating unemployment in a city in a day. Okay, it's a 6-month lead up. We did all the research, our internal research at KI. We studied the Sunshine Coast, which is where I live, 360,000 people. So it's a smallish regional city. We have 10,000 at that point in time, 10,000 unemployed people. We have a lot of crime, a lot of suicide, a lot of domestic violence was the worst. It was the biggest topic in the region. A lot of suicide and so on and so on. And there's 35,000 small to medium enterprises. We worked out that after quantifying all the social distress and human misery, what does that look like in dollar terms? What does it look like in dollar terms if you take everybody off welfare, the 10,000 people, and bring them onto just the minimum wage? It's an uplift of so much for them, and take into account the circular spending of $1 in a region, you suddenly end up as if more than 2 million tourists had come to the Sunshine Coast and spent over $1,000 each but never actually came. Okay, so the uplift in the regional GDP was off the planet, and then the social benefits of no more suicide, much less family breakdown, much less DV, much less, delinquencies, all that sort of stuff, much less crime. Nobody's trying to steal my jet ski anymore, and so on. Most amazing, just using God's applied biblical economics of caring and sharing. So we put it out there and said, let's launch this as a kind of a dummy launch from the Sunshine Coast, KI, and we did that, and there was, I can't remember how many countries zoomed in, academics, universities from all over the world, governments. The very next day, 2 days later, the federal minister phoned me and said we're starting to come out of COVID, and he said, hey, we've got $6 billion, and I think Pastor Suzette was instrumental in that, wherever she's hiding. There she is, right, hiding in the front. You remember that? Yep, and so he phoned and said, we've got $6 billion in the purse to get Aussies back to work after COVID. This is the only strategy we've heard of. You must avail yourself of this. And I said, I was only being facetious. And I said, Minister, I hate filling in forms. He said, I will allocate you someone who will do that for you. And he said, what's your next step? I said, we've got a steering committee. We would love to be on that committee. He said, I'll do it personally. And if I can't be there, I'll send a senior decision maker. They bought in to do this thing with the unemployment white paper that we'd put out. It was an astounding uptake. Inflation, which is another horrific thing that comes out of capitalism, how do we fix that other than cranking interest rates up so that the banks can profit? So we did our own studies internally, and we've actually found this out years earlier, instead of cranking up the interest rates, which is only benefiting or penalizing about 1/3 of the population that owns houses, okay? If you want to stop inflation, prices rising, you open a bank account. Everybody, when they leave school to become a certain age, they must have an inflation savings account, okay? It's a compulsory thing. Whether you use it or not, it doesn't matter until inflation starts to get out of hand. Then everybody is compelled to put a certain part of their wages into that account, which is an interest-bearing account. Inflation will stop within 3 to 4 months, not 3 to 4 years, because now you're pinging the whole working population. The spending slows right down, and then everybody gets all their money back, not the banks, okay? The banks are corrupt, and they make big dollars out of inflation, okay? So that was another thing that we've spoken to government about. Very, very interesting. Oh, geez, wonder no one thought of that, okay? And then so much more stuff, guys. I'm sort of out of time here. I've only got 3 minutes, but I just want you to know, I think I've got a flyer somewhere. If you want to join KI and learn all of this stuff, there's a special on. There it is, so if you want to take a happy snap of that, take a selfie of that, it's $15 a month. We're not doing it to make money because we'd prefer to make money from our business, but I've got to pay all the wages of the girls, my team that run it, and so on. And it's on special for KBI and ISOM for this conference people. And that link actually works now. The first time we did it for Tamara, it didn't work, and about 35 people couldn't get on. All right, guys, so I spoke fast like Tamara. She's taught me how to speak fast now. But it's a big, big topic for a short little piece of time. I was trying to articulate that there is a massive big picture going on. We all fit in under that. Doesn't matter if you're a church or a business or an individual or a country. Like it or not, God has a vision for the planet, and it is to create modern-day sheep nations. And Jesus ain't coming back until they're there, because he says so, okay? So the sheep nation, I don't want to encourage him to come back. I'm having a good time. But nevertheless, we've got to create these sheep nations, and if you can find where you fit in under that in terms of your assignment, the Lord will apply his favor. As long as you do it his way, remember God's will, God's way, then he will apply his favor, and you will rocket up supernaturally to wherever he's got you to be working at. And if we all did that, we'd get there much quicker, and we will achieve universal prosperity and human flourishing. I have skimmed the surface of the prototypes of the proof of concepts that we have, where we've made millionaires out of poor people, and lots of them, simply by caring and sharing. In my case, it was time. I didn't have any money. I was totally broke, but I shared my time and my expertise with very poor people, and they became millionaires very quickly, and I rose with them, and we all rose with the tide of prosperity. Okay, and we can achieve universal prosperity and human flourishing if we do it God's way, and if we understand holistic capitalism, people, profit, planet. and there's lots more teaching to come on that, okay? So I'm a minute early. God bless you, and it's thanks for the privilege of talking to you.